Hello, 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 Team 24 here, and we are back with some more Marvel Snap content. Now, if you've clicked on the video, you know what we got here. We're talking about the new card Legion and the first version of the decks we are going to try him with. Now, if you've seen any of my videos, you know what we're gonna do. We're gonna look at some gameplay. We're gonna talk about this deck, but here's where I'm gonna switch it up a little bit. Because he's brand new, instead, I'm gonna give you some cards to counter him and some potential deck ideas for Legion. But for now, let's get into some gameplay. Alright, so let's get right into this gameplay. You see the deck, you know what we're doing. This is Legion Lock. I've got 3 games for you here. But this first one, you're gonna see, you don't necessarily need Storm to make use of Legion. So in this instance, we're trying to get some power down. We've got a couple of locations that are a bit tricky. Quantum Tunnel, meaning we're not gonna be able to get the card we want there. It's going to be random. Altar of Death would have been interesting, but they armored it, so hey, whatever, that's gone now. Now, the one clear lane we had was Oscorp, and in this instance, they are ahead. They're snapping right away because they assume I'm gonna give them a lizard and a squirrel, but we pick up Storm. So we're like, yeah, we're gonna get Storm down. We're gonna try and win this game without going Storm into Legion. And this just shows you that it's possible to do that, and it's possible to make use of Legion without just relying on Storm. So as you can see here, we storm that lane. Now we're way ahead. We're up 8, and that's going to force them to either commit and play pretty heavily into flooding or try to win the Quantum Tunnel, which again is just going to be random cards coming through, and that is going to be very tough. So we've secured flooding. We are in good shape. We get Mr. Fantastic down in the middle as well. They drop a Cosmo, which would have been great on that flooding lane, but then it pulls Iron Man, and we are a bit worried about that. Now, here's where it's a little bit tricky, right? We're gonna throw Squirrel Girl and Nightcrawler into the Quantum Tunnel. They can see what's going on, but what happens here is what is going to kind of open this game up a little bit, and you know, it takes away that flooding, which is tough. But really what we've done, we've forced our opponent to play on these other locations, and they weren't able to get power into that lane for a couple of turns. So still, even though we're going to get rid of that flooded lane, it's not all bad. It still gives us an opportunity to do something here. And as you can see, Quantum Tunnel comes through. We get Jeff with our first pull, and then our second pull is going to be Legion himself, turning everything into the Quantum Tunnel. So that does open up the Quantum Tunnel for them, but we end up taking that lane because of what popped out. So we're ahead thanks to Legion, Jeff, and Luke Cage. Now we've got Chavez, the only card we can play, so it's going to be tough. It's going to be really tough to win that lane. We're throwing our most powerful card into the Quantum Tunnel, and we're worried that any sort of buff is going to help them win, that far left Quantum Tunnel lane. They throw a lizard through, and my worst fears are immediately realized. Spectrum comes through, they play Captain America, Lizard comes back, but we end up winning by 1 point, and then 7 in the far left, far right respectively, and we get a nice win without going Storm Legion. But if that's what you are here for, these next 2 games are for you, and it just shows you how to play this deck. It's very, very straightforward. You want to get Nebula down. In this instance, we pick up Lizard, which is great because that's 5 power. That's going to be really tough for them to match. Now, Attilan is a tough location. It means that obviously our hand is being shuffled in, so we've got to hope that we draw Storm and Legion if that's the route that we're going to go. Spoiler alert, we do, so it's not a big deal, but as you can see here, we're trying to get some other power down. We don't want to play Deathlock on top of anything, and we want to try and slow down that Nebula Sunspot lane. But to be honest, that might have just been a waste because it's going to be really tough to compete with that lane when you've got probably the 2 strongest 1-drops in a single lane. But hey, we're going to give it a go anyway and see what happens. So Jeff comes down, and we're just waiting on our opponent to make a move here. Obviously, we can't really plan too far ahead because our hand is going to be shuffled, or so we thought. Magic comes through, and that is great news for us. Now they assume that there's going to be a turn 7. We are storming Death's Domain. As far as they know, we're just trying to get some power there and lock down that location. But really, we have Legion ready to go as backup, and we are in a really, really nice spot. So both of our Nebulas get powered up. Our storm comes through, but so does theirs. So they play their own storm, and they play Misty Knight. And this Misty Knight kind of gave me an idea for another deck, which we'll talk about in a minute. But of course, we're going to come through with Legion. That's 8 power coming down, and we're locking out the rest of the board. So as long as they don't play anything too crazy and flooding, we should be in a good spot. Now, because we're ahead, we get to go first with Legion, which is perfect. That's exactly what we wanted. They had a very poor turn 5, playing just the high evolutionary. Now, as you can see, they end up retreating, and we get a nice big victory. That's the one thing with this deck. 99% of the time, it is not going to go to turn 6, simply because once they see that it's locked out, they will be gone. It's like playing Galactus of the old days. Chances are you're only going to get 2 cubes, but it's going to be a fun 2 cubes. So get in, play it while you can. As you can see here, we're just trying to get power down. We've got Sunspot, we've got Nightcrawler. Mr. Fantastic on turn 2 feels great. We pick up Storm, but we are still looking for Legion. Now they make a pretty nice play here, shutting down the Superflow for us, but also shutting it down for them. Honestly, not a big deal, because we kind of have the cards we need, and with the Superflow shut down for both of us, we're still fighting on even ground. But they are ahead because Polaris easily outpowers Nightcrawler, so we've still got to try and spread some power around and make sure that we are ahead going into turn 4 and 5, specifically 5. So seeing Camertage, we've got Squirrel Girl. That makes perfect sense. We need to get some power down. They didn't play anything, which is great for us, not great for them, as that's going to allow us to get Storm down quite easily. And then as long as we're still ahead, which now we're ahead in every location, we should get Legion down and completely lock them out again. So it's all about getting ahead so that your Legion can come through. Even if they flip over that one location, it will be tough for them to compete on any of the other ones. So we get Storm down. As you can see, they play into that middle location, which means we should have the far right and we should have the Superflow ready to go. With Wong coming down, we know that we are in great shape. The only thing that could really hurt us would probably be White Tiger coming through, putting, some 7 powers out there, but we will still have flooding, and then we would have the center location as well. Instead, we see Shuri. They see that they're locked out, and the game is over. This is a fun deck. Yes, I understand it's frustrating, but we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about some counters, and we're going to talk about some potential deck ideas right now. Let's go. All right, so you've seen some gameplay. Now let's talk about this deck. So as you can see here, we're fairly heavy on 1-drops, 2-drops, and then we've got some movement mechanics in here. And the reason for that is, you've seen it in a couple of the clips. You want to go Storm on 4, Legion on 5, completely lock out the board. Congrats, you win the game. Now, I know that can be super frustrating, but it's a fun new mechanic, so we had to try that out. Now, the reason we've got these cards in here, obviously, we need to get some power down on the board before no one can play. Sunspot, Nebula, great at that. Lizard as well. Mr. Fantastic, not too bad, but sometimes it feels a little bit better to go with something like an Ebony Maw and Luke Cage, or get Nightcrawler out there. And, Jeff is the one exception. You can play Jeff on 6, so it's best to just hold him. So obviously the idea is spread your power around a little bit, and then know that you're going to put 10 power in the form of Storm and Legion onto one lane. So you can kind of space your power accordingly to make sure that you're ahead of your opponent going into 6. Now, even if you're behind by a little bit, Sunspot can make that up. Playing Jeff on 6 could make that up, so you have some options. Now, I know this would be super frustrating to run into, so let's talk about some potential counters. And I'm going to throw up a graphic here, and you'll see we've got counters and we've got potential inclusions. So let's start with counters. The first one I've got up there is High Evolutionary. And the reason I see this working is, one, you've got cards like Cyclops, which is going to do great at hurting, negating some of your opponent's power. So if you play that against someone that's playing Legion has locked you out, you're probably going to win that lane. Additionally, a card like Misty Knight is going to continue to buff up your other cards. Not a bad inclusion there. So if you're going with a smaller, high evolutionary deck, something that has Sunspot, that has Nebula, that has Cyclops, you might be in pretty good shape. Even having Wasp now isn't a bad idea because you could just throw Wasp in there on 5 and you're feeling pretty good. So I see high evolutionary as a potential counter to this deck. Additionally, we've got 2 other 3-drops. We've got one is pretty straightforward. I mean, it is going to be Killmonger. These Legion decks are probably going to rely fairly heavily on 1-drops. So having a way to just answer all those 1-drops, as long as you've got a couple 2-drops out there, you will probably win the game. So Killmonger seems like almost an instant win against Legion. Additionally, Cosmo is a pretty good option as well, as you can block Legions on reveal from coming down. Now you need to be ahead on board in order to do that, and that may be a little bit tough against a deck that is throwing 1-drops out there, 2-drops out there. But if you can get ahead, you know where they're going to play Legion, so just play Cosmo and you are in good shape. Now, I've got Elektra on here, and I don't mean just Elektra herself as a counter. I mean a Zoo-style deck. Legion's going to come down on 5. So, if you're playing Zoo, you could play Khazar on 4, Blue Marvel on 5. Ideally, you've got Squirrel Girl down. You've got Nightcrawler down. You've got some other 1-drops. Maybe it's Mr. Sinister and Brood that you're powering up. It's going to make it really tough for your opponent to beat you in those lanes if you have multiple cards there. Elektra, though, might not be a bad idea if they are running these 1-drops. That's an easy snipe, and you're feeling pretty good. So, I think if you went something with a Zoo, maybe a high evolutionary, or just include a Killmonger and Cosmo, you're probably in pretty good shape to counter Legion. Now, let's talk about a couple ways that I could see Legion lot going. And one card is easy inclusion, and that's going to be Jean Grey. And to me, this just makes sense. If you can get Sunspot down on 1, Nebula and let's say Nightcrawler on 2, and then you can play Jean Grey, you're going to force them to play on that lane. Well, you're going to play Jean Grey, then Storm, then Legion all in one lane, and if they haven't put much power in those other lanes, you're probably going to win. So I could see Jean Grey being a really influential card here. Now, I've gone with, trying to get as much power out there before going Storm into Legion, but I could see that being more of a control version of a Legion deck. Now, we've come to high evolutionary, and the same way that it counters is the same way that you're going to win. You can get your Sunspot Nebula down. You can get that Misty Knight down. Wasp even feels pretty good. And then you've got Cyclops, which is going to win you that lane. So I could see a high evolutionary version of Legion lock with Storm and Legion working really, really well. So those are a couple of deck ideas. You've got some counters. You see the deck that I was using. It's a pretty fun card. I know it's going to be a bit controversial just because some people aren't going to like the fact that they get stormed on all 3 locations. But hey, it'll be all right. We've got answers and we can deal with it. But if you've hung around till now, I really do appreciate you taking time to watch the video. Now would be a great time to subscribe and like the video. And hey, turn on those notifications so you don't miss a single one. Until the next one though, have some fun.